Ever get a Google Ads performance report from your agency that tells you absolutely nothing? Like you read it twice, you still have no idea what it says or what's happening in the account, why things are being done. And somewhere around the third month of just being clueless through no fault of your own, you start to question, like, are these people actually doing anything? Like, what am I paying for? Why am I working with an agency? Are they good? Do they know what they're doing? If you've ever had that thought, you're not alone. There are a lot of reasons why you should feel that way. Sometimes the agency is great. Sometimes the agency is terrible and taking you for a ride. I was on Reddit the other day. Somebody was like, hey, I'm spending $25K a month on just my agency retainer, and I don't know what they're doing. Like, are they doing enough? I can see the change history. They have access to the account, which is a win. So basically, they're asking, okay, I can see the changes. I don't know what they should be doing for this 25K. And the thing that blows my mind is that there were people responding, no context or anything, and they're like, you're being overcharged. And the person, the original poster was like, yikes. But they don't know who this person is that said you're being overcharged. They don't know why that person said that. And that person who said it had no context. Most of the time, these people that are responding have worked on a few accounts that are like maybe, $5,000 to $10,000. And they're like, oh, you're spending $200,000 to $400,000 a month paying $25K. You're being overcharged. On what grounds? You don't know what the performance is. You don't know how much they're doing for that company. And you don't know anything about the service. So the problem with going on Reddit and asking, hey, what should I be doing, is that most of the people who are responding on Reddit are trying to get clients. And so they're just throwing out information saying, hey, you're being overcharged, or like, oh no, I only charge $3,000 a month no matter what the spend is. Well, most of these people have never worked on an account of that size. And so they have no idea the kind of work that goes into that versus the type of account that they typically work on, which is maybe about 10% of that size or less. So if you're charging $3,000 a month for an account that's spending $200,000 to $400,000 a month, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that account, you can't have other clients, or you are just trying to desperately help those other small clients so that you can take care of this really big client. But at $3,000 a month, you're not going to be able to hire help for that. And it generally takes more than one person to really manage an account that size well. So if you have an account that size and you're asking, hey, is my retainer, it's relatively low, 5 figures, is that too high? And people just immediately are like, yes, that's too high. No, don't listen to them, because now that agency, even if they're doing a really good job, is going to end up like in hot water. That subconscious seed of doubt is growing. So even if they're doing a great job, they may end up getting fired soon because some dude with no context said that they were being overcharged. Honestly, $25K might be a bit high for $200,000 a month spend, depending on the performance and how much is actually going into it outside of just ad management. If there is a whole lot going on around data plumbing or landing page building and things like that, then maybe it's worth it. But at the 400K mark, definitely 25K is not absurd, especially if the agency has a team they're dedicating to this and they're giving it ample time. However, there are also a lot of factors that go into play, where I've seen accounts this size and twice this size getting very little support on both the in-house team's side and the agency side. And so it's kind of succeeding in spite of itself and could be optimized dramatically by both partners working together, in the same direction instead of just kind of infighting and then neglect. So I'm going to go over a few scenarios that will kind of help to explain how to understand, should I keep my agency? Should I fire my agency? quick intro. Now that I've spent the last 5 minutes waxing poetic about why you shouldn't listen to just randos on Reddit. I'm Ryan Baker. I'm the founder of Kingly Consulting. I have spent the last decade working in agencies, working with agencies. I have been a VP at a mid-size agency. I've been director of client services at a mid-size agency. I've been a paid search director. I've been a fractional paid search director for larger agencies. I have been an ad specialist. I've been a CSM. I've helped with tracking. I've consulted with agencies on their PPC operations and their team development. And I've been kind of running my own agency here and there in between all of that. So I have a lot of experience with agencies. I have a lot of experience with accounts that like spent $50 once all the way up to spending $1 million a month or more. So I have lots of variety in my experience across countless industries. And I've seen what works. I've seen what doesn't work. And I want to help clear things up for those who are confused, because there's so much misinformation and conflicting information. Because honestly, there's a lot of variables to pretty well any decision. So let's jump in. The way transparently, because everybody on Reddit is going to be answering your questions for their own benefit, just as much as for yours. I want to explain what I get out of sharing this message. So essentially, I help in-house teams vet their agencies. I help them choose a new agency if they're looking for one. More often than that, I will train in-house teams to take their PPC management in-house so that they don't necessarily have to pay $25K a month to an agency. They can hire a couple of people, even at $8,000 a month. They can pay these people low six figures and still come out ROI positive in the first couple of months by paying for training that sets them up for success long term. And that's the sort of thing that builds that foundation of internal competence that can bypass the kind of confusion of, does this agency know what they're doing? Even if you're paying an agency, training someone in-house is generally a relatively affordable one-time payment that is not even going to be as big as the retainer that they're paying the agency. And it equips the team to understand what the agency is doing. Is the agency providing the appropriate amount of work and value, as it really is more about the quality of the work than the quantity of the changes in the account. That should that's very important to make clear. So basically, I can benefit if you keep your agency. I benefit if you don't. I also have hiring systems for in-house teams that want to find help that already knows what they're doing. Usually, though, strategy is not a strong suit for ad managers. That's one of the core elements of my training. So yeah, if you're looking to bring somebody in-house, even if you hire somebody, it's generally not a bad idea to train them so that they understand how to make decisions, both from a strategic standpoint and also from a reactive optimization standpoint. So just get all that out of the way. Let's kind of dig into how to make this decision, when to keep an agency, when to get rid of them. So essentially, I want to start with what a good agency actually brings to the table. The answer to should I fire my agency has to start with being able to recognize what a good agency looks like. So one of the really valuable things that an agency brings to the table is pattern recognition. So in a decade of working with agencies, I've had a hand in over 1,000 accounts, and I still run into things that I've never seen before. There's so much that can go sideways in a Google Ads account that having a library basically in your mind of situations to draw from is worth a ridiculous amount. I do a lot of coaching calls with both beginners that I've trained or intermediate ad managers who are just kind of maybe getting into the agency space where they've worked on one account in-house but they're starting to work with a bunch of different industries, and they don't know, okay, how do I manage this in a way that's different from this, because it doesn't seem to be doing the same thing. And so with all of the things that I've seen, I can, even with advanced ad managers, I can tell you, okay, looking at this account, this is why you're not getting the results you expect, or this is why you're not able to scale, or this is why, you're seeing those crazy high CPCs, this is why you're limited by budget, whatever. So a senior strategist who's lived through hundreds of accounts generally is going to know what they're looking at before they even finish opening the report. There is another version of that, though. So when you see what works in one industry, you can test that in another industry. So you have not just a library of scenarios that you know how to troubleshoot, but you also have different tactics that you can test from one industry to another. If the audiences or markets are similar, if you see that this offer is similar to this offer, or the kind of demand journey is similar in this industry to this industry, then you can take what worked over here and move it over here. And a lot of times get results that somebody without that cross industry experience wouldn't be able to bring to the table. So, generally you will find that, different accounts work in different ways. So the skill gap between the in-house ad managers that have worked on one account, that they know that account inside and out, generally is going to be like night and day difference. Somebody who's spent years managing dozens of different accounts in an agency is going to have just a much bigger toolbox to bring to the table for that one account that they manage. So if they go from agency to in-house, they're going to be a lot more valuable than the situation I see sometimes at smaller agencies that think that it's reasonable to hire an in-house ad manager who's never been in an agency before. It's not a bad idea. Somebody with experience is somebody with experience, but they then wonder why that person is overwhelmed and confused moving from one account to a dozen accounts. And a lot of times, if that account was set up for them, they don't know how to set up conversion tracking. They don't know how to set up new campaigns. They know how to optimize kind of sometimes. So I've trained a lot of these ad managers that have been in-house or who have kind of just had it thrown on them because the company left their agency and they're like, hey, you're young, you understand technology and stuff. Why don't you take over our PPC? A good agency has these people who generally, it's going to depend on your retainer. It's going to depend on the size of the agency you go with. If you go with a big agency, 9 times out of 10, unless you're spending 6 figures a month, you're going to have a junior ad manager who has very little experience, maybe 1 to 3 years, not that many accounts that they've had for a long time, but they may be loaded up with 25, 30 accounts themselves. I've never worked in an agency where I wasn't given more than 30 accounts to manage, which blows some people's minds. Some people are like, oh, nobody should ever have more than 6 accounts. I mean, sure, if they're all spending, $100,000 a month or more, but honestly, if they're spending $1,000 to $5,000 a month, it's not crazy to have 30 accounts if you're organized and know what you're doing. That said, a good agency is going to be one. Usually the smaller agencies or boutique agencies are going to be able to put somebody intermediate or advanced on your account, no matter your size. They will often, though, have spend thresholds. So if you can afford to work with a boutique agency, or if you're spending enough to work with a boutique agency, it's probably going to be better than working with a bigger agency. I'm not going to name names, but I have seen all too often over the last decade companies leaving large agencies because they felt like they weren't valued. They never knew who they were going to be talking to because the turnover was so high. Their point of contact was always different every month. They had to re-explain their company over and over again because internal processes didn't have a way of consistently passing down that information, even though that's super easy. And they would go to a smaller agency and get much better service, much better performance, and like actually feel cared about because they were. Not saying that people in large agencies are not good or that they don't care. It's just generally at that level, you're going to get passed to a junior ad manager and a CSM just who really were just looking for a job in marketing and they don't necessarily know what they're doing. They're on the way up, but you're getting them at the bottom. So the benefit, though, to an agency versus having somebody in-house, unless you hire them out of an agency, is that they have this breadth of experience. They have worked on accounts from lots of different industries at lots of different levels of spend. They've tested lots of different things, and then they have the benefit of the team around them who has expertise in tracking and analytics, or in maybe they've got separate copywriters, or they have people to develop landing pages and things like that. So having that team to support you can mean much more than just having one person in-house who's a generalist trying to figure it all out. So that said, the good agency is going to give you a team. They're going to give you a breadth of experience that you don't necessarily get inside of your in-house team. They're going to give you speed. So, you don't have to throw out a job posting. You don't have to wait 3 months and go through interview after interview, not necessarily knowing whether these people are actually as good as they're saying. That's another thing. I do hiring systems. So I see a lot of really bad hiring systems where the people who are hiring have no idea what they're looking for or how to actually hire that person. So they're just kind of having to take it on faith that like, oh yeah, you have a lot of experience and your stories sound good. And yeah, okay, let's go. And then, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't, you're out like, sometimes 3 to 5x the monthly salary of this person. And your account suffers in performance. And so, you end up in this like absolutely terrible state of loss because you made a bad hiring decision and then you have to go and do it again. So, a lot of times you end up just with your leadership in the marketing team trying to juggle everything themselves in the midst of also setting strategy and trying to do everything else in your daily work. So the agency can save you a ton of that because they do all the hiring. They've made the decisions. They vet, and if they have turnover, then they're doing the hiring anyway. But there's always somebody relatively competent, depending on the agency, to take over your account. So a good agency is going to bring you that speed and be able to jump in and just take over from day one. So you can also have, and with an agency, the benefit can go beyond just Google Ads. So like if you are running Google Ads, you're also running SEO, you're running meta ads. You can sometimes find an agency that is full service that's going to run all these things for you. And that retainer is going to be lower than if you had to hire an expert in every single one of those fields. If you hire a generalist who knows how to do all those things, and you have them in-house, you're going to get someone who can manage all those things, but you don't necessarily have a team of people who are experts in each of those fields. And so you're going to pay just as much or more for all of, in opportunity cost, in lost leads and in lost efficiency by paying somebody. It feels more efficient to pay, like $10K a month to somebody who knows how to do all these things than to pay an agency like, $30K a month. But if you look at what the agency can bring to the table in their expertise and being able to have a separate person for each of these positions that knows what they're doing, they can get the most out of the channel. They can all work together, and they've got their data and analytics team that can then analyze, and they've got a strategist who can come in and help make decisions. Like, you're not going to be able to beat that with one person. Maybe two or three people internally. You can get a PPC expert, an SEO expert, and a strategist or something. Maybe you're the strategist. Sometimes that can outperform an agency, but it's tough to find those experts, especially if they're already working in the agency. So sometimes there's the benefit there. And if you have that one person who's doing everything, that's going to burn them out really fast. Sometimes you get that person who just loves the chaos. Great. You take really good care of them, they'll stick around. Awesome. But somebody with that level of skill, a lot of times they're leaving to start their own agency because they're like, well, why would I do this for $10K a month when I can go over here, get 5 clients at, $3K a month, $5K a month, and I'm, like more than doubling my income. So they leave to start an agency, and maybe they're coming back and they're like, hey, tell you what, I will do this for you for like a fraction of what you were paying me, but you need to also be on retainer, and I'm not going to give you 40 hours a week and yada yada. So if that person leaves, you didn't have to go and find somebody else. Well, if an agency, like if they lose somebody in-house, then again, they're hiring. So you don't necessarily have to deal with transferring all of that knowledge. They are supposed to retain all of that internally and train their people on how to manage your account, bring them up to speed. There's usually handoff processes in place. So that continuity can work in your favor with an agency. So basically, if you're spending like, less than 15 to 20K on an agency retainer, it's probably going to make more sense to stick with the agency versus hiring somebody in-house. So like once you've got that kind of fully loaded internal hire, counting salary and benefits, any software that you may be giving them, Optimizer or Optio or one of these platforms to help them with the audits and the management and things like that. Cost to recruit them, you're probably going to be in over 6 figures on this person anyway. So just being able to pay experts to get started, that makes more sense. You can justify a higher management fee until you increase your spend enough that your retainer starts to kind of pass that 25 to 30K mark. And again, it's all going to depend on what your internal team is capable of, and whether you're willing to hire. So again, I've kind of mentioned there are good agencies that are like this, that do the things they're supposed to do. There are a lot of agencies out there that really, really care, and they do their best to take really good care of people. But agencies have a bad rep for a reason. Agencies have really high turnover. They generally, I've worked with so many leaders in agencies, and they just, more often than not these days, especially with AI, they're checked out. They don't care. They don't want to have all of the work. They want to have the cash cow business model. They want to hire people to do the work. They paid their dues, managing accounts on the way up. They want to focus on sales. They want to focus on content creation. They want to be the face. Okay, whatever. But then the communication internally suffers. The performance of the accounts tanks because nobody's really communicating how to bridge the strategy that was sold to the actions that are being performed on the account, and then how to get the outcomes that the client actually wants in the first place, which may or may not have been successfully uncovered in the discovery meeting. And there's so much going on in the agency that is not being communicated well from the top down. And so you'll have these situations where they bring on a new client, they sell them on one thing, and then a different team with no insight into what was sold jumps in and just does the thing that they normally do. Okay, I'm going to optimize the account. I'm going to build out these campaigns this way. I'm going to manage things this way. And nothing that was originally promised gets delivered because nobody's talking to each other. They don't know what expectations have been set. So There are a lot of structural problems in agencies that prevent them from delivering the level of value that they can, and those benefits that we talked about just, for the last 15 minutes. Those don't always get carried forward. The larger the agency, usually the harder it is for that communication to be consistently carried from top down. And the more likely you are to have a completely different person selling you than the person who's managing the account. And a freelancer is going to be able to bypass all of those problems, but a freelancer is also one person. So, sometimes, like, I manage Google Ads accounts, but, if you were to come to me and say, hey, can you manage my Google Ads account and also my Meta account and do some SEO, build some landing pages, very quickly, I'm going to be like, no, I'll manage your ads and I can stand up some landing pages for you. But, based on my current bandwidth and clients and everything, like I can do these things for you, but not everything. Whereas the agency is going to be like, yeah, I've got a full team. I've got this, I've got that. So you can get communication is all with just one person with a freelancer. And so they don't have to communicate expectations, and they set the strategy and then they implement the strategy. You don't get that in agencies, but you have to make that decision. Is it worth giving up the single point of failure to give it to a place that may or may not have cracks all through their foundation? So you kind of have that bait and switch situation where you're sold on one thing and then they don't necessarily carry that through to delivery. Generally, again, in a smaller agency, that is going to be, the founder might be the salesperson, and then the founder has like a few people under them that they then are in close communication with, and they have a meeting with them and they share the transcript from the sales or the deck or whatever. And then they're like, here's how we need to make sure this gets carried through. Sometimes the ad manager who's going to be on your account helped design the deck or the strategy. And so in those cases, you can get a really clear and consistent path from strategy that was promised to implementation and the steps that are taken. But, it's not always going to be the case. And a lot of times a great ad manager is not a great strategist. And I got to say that my understanding of people and behavioral styles and just all of the people I've worked with over the years, you see somebody who's a great engineer, a great ad manager, great with data and analytics, great with understanding the engine and how it all works. They're great at seeing the trees, but they don't recognize the forest. So being able to have somebody, it generally takes a training to have the forest or to see the forest if you're a trees person. And if you're a forest person, you've got to be trained to see the trees and understand what to do with those. And so over the course of, 8 to 10 years, you can have somebody that can do both really, really well. But also, the strategist that can see the forest is usually going to get bored if they're staring at trees all day. Whereas the person in the trees is going to want to do all that, but they don't want to do all the stuff that has to do with panning back out and looking at the forest, and it's not their natural state. So one of the things that an agency can bring to the table is having both parties, but one of the things that they usually struggle with is having both parties that communicate really well together, because they don't necessarily think about this person is different than me. They communicate differently than me. So, maybe I need to communicate this thing that I take for granted. Okay, so I'm getting all sorts of in the weeds on all sorts of things. Essentially, we already mentioned that junior ad managers are going to be in charge of most accounts in bigger agencies. And unless you're spending 6 figures a month or more, you're probably not going to get somebody with a whole lot of experience. And usually your point of contact is not the person, especially in larger agencies. But because of that difference in behavioral styles that I mentioned, it's hard to find an ad manager who is also the client facing or the CSM. So your point of contact may have some really good ideas and share ideas with you. And you're like, yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea. But then that communication to the ad manager isn't always a guaranteed thing. So the ad manager is just doing their thing in the background, and they'll send some notes, and then the CSM shares those, comes up with ideas. They're pitching strategies, and then sometimes they don't communicate that to the ad manager, or sometimes they do, and the ad manager is like, yeah, I don't really trust you because I know what I'm doing, and you don't, because that person, the CSM, doesn't manage ads more often than not. So you end up with this, this situation where it's kind of an ego trip, and they're like, yeah, I don't have to do what you say because you don't know what you're talking about. Or sometimes the great idea is not actually translatable to actions in the ad account. And so, it sounded cool, but it's not something you can do. So there's a lot of ways, again, it's not going to happen every time, but there's a lot of ways that you can run into trouble with an agency when communication is involved across several people. So basically, the difficulty with an agency that doesn't know what they're doing, there are so many things that can go wrong. It's usually going to be communication breaks down internally. Your strategy is either going to be non-existent, or it's just going to be like your strategy is spend more and or build out campaigns in this specific way, when there's no real kind of path to growth or what to do when you are tapped out on search and you're not able to expand your keyword coverage without losing your shorts on CAC. And so you end up with just a massive problem when people don't understand strategy and how to take their strategy and turn it into actions, because it's this waterfall effect that starts at the top, and you can get leads, and sometimes they're quality leads, but they rarely translate into closed won, because you end up just knowing how to drive those numbers up, which again sometimes is what your CEO wants, or your CMO, and it's all you are aiming for. But if that's what you're incentivizing, that's what you're going to get. So if you're not incentivizing pipeline, then you're probably shooting yourself in the feet anyway. And it doesn't matter if you have an agency or an in-house person, you're going to end up with a bunch of big numbers up front and nothing on the back. So there's lots of issues there. The other communication issue that agencies tend to have is the reporting. So basically, they don't know what to tell you. They don't know how to tell it to you. They don't know how to explain the story to you. And so if you're the type of person that is like, hey, I need to explain this to my boss, and you're not giving me the resources needed to come and take what you're doing and translate it into human speak to tell my boss, I'm going to lose my job because, or I'm going to have to fire you because I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what's happening because of what you're doing. And I don't know how to explain this to my boss, who is asking me like, hey, that agency you chose to hire, are they doing a good job? Did you make the right decision? Like, it's all on you. And if they can't communicate clearly, here's the KPIs you're going for, here's, our path to hitting those, or, here's how we're hitting those, here's the changes we're making and what is happening because of those changes. Here's why things are down. Here's why things are up. Here's, this is a temporary thing. So, we can capitalize on this by taking this strategy, and, or, hey, this is a slow ramp up thing. So, let's have this focus. We'll cut this for this reason. Like, there's no why, there's no story. It's all just like, hey, here's the numbers. Like, that doesn't help you. So unless you're an expert, which like you hired them because they are, right? Then you don't always know how to translate what they're doing. And if you're like this poor person on Reddit who's like, we're spending $25K and I don't know like if they're doing enough, they should never question, or you should never have to question whether your agency's doing enough, because again, it's not about the quantity of the changes, it's about the quality of the results. And so if they're doing the right things and they're communicating with you well enough about what they're doing, what's happening, and why, like, and it shouldn't feel like a snake oil pitch. Like every time, it should just be a transparent conversation. Like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's what we've seen. Here's some insights and observations. Here is, what we plan to do next, and why. Then like that really is all you need, so that you can be like, hey, yeah, here's what's going on, boss. Here's what is happening with the money that we're spending. Here's why it's a good investment. Here's what they plan to do next and what they expect to happen from that. And then you can be the hero for having hired them, which is, job security. It'd be nice to have, right? So essentially, the agencies that just throw a bunch of numbers at you, they're the ones that you probably need to actually have that conversation first with them, instead of being like, hey, you're fired because you don't explain what's happening. Like you should ask them, hey, what is actually happening? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What are we getting out of it? Like, what is happening because of your changes? And are they strategically led? Are we just optimizing based on performance? Should we launch a strategic initiative? Should there be a specific test that we should have in place right now? Are we testing anything? What are we doing to get to our goals? So have those conversations, because, as much as communication can break down in an agency, communication can also be terrible between you and the agency. And really your relationships are only going to be as good as the communication and honesty and transparency that you put into them. So if you want to know what your agency's doing, ask them. If they're doing a good job, they're not going to be like tripping all over themselves to externally process what is actually happening for the first time, thinking it through. While they're answering the question, they should just be able to tell you honestly. So, and if you want a different report that's going to be more helpful to you, you've got to ask for it. If you're not getting it now, tell them what you need. And generally, if they're going to be a good agency, then they'll make it for you. There are a lot of things to look at when it comes to whether you should fire your agency or not. A lot of it comes down to, do you trust them? Are you willing to pay the retainer, and do you feel like it's worth it? If you want to make a really wise decision, like monetarily, about taking it in-house, if you're not getting the results that you want from your agency, and if your retainer is like $20K plus, it probably makes sense to look for someone in-house. If you have somebody in-house already that knows how to manage ads, or if you are considering hiring someone to manage ads, that's usually the point, 20K plus in agency retainer. It's usually the point when it's worth looking at, but you've got to have the right systems for hiring. You've got to have the ability to determine, does this person I'm hiring have the chops to do a better job than the agency? And how quickly will it happen? How much of a ramp up period do we need to get this person in and performing just as well or better than the agency? Usually it makes sense to train that person. Even agencies, even though they don't do it, should be training their new hires. Yes, you hired someone who knows how to manage the ads. Great. Do they know how to manage ads in a way that meets your expectations? Do they know how to communicate in a way that meets your expectations? Do you know what your expectations are? So you've got to have the right systems for hiring in place, and for vetting the talent that you're planning to hire, for laying out processes for communicating to them what your expectations are. And you've got to find someone that can turn strategy into action. Or you've got to be able to teach them how to do that. So if you're in that position where like you've got the good systems, or you're willing to hire me to, set them up and train your person and, coach them and everything, like if you want to put all that into place and you're paying more than 20K for a retainer, it's probably worth letting your agency go, as long as you don't trust them, and you're not sure what they're doing, and you've tried to communicate this to them and they don't make changes. If you are on the fence about whether to keep them or not, like the performance is pretty good, like they're willing to talk to you and they're nice, and they seem honest and everything, then I would encourage you, instead of firing your agency, have conversations with them, explain to them what your concerns are, what you want, what would be helpful for you as far as communication, as far as reporting, as far as strategic conversations. The more clearly you can articulate what you want in the relationship, the more likely they are to actually be able to put it together for you. If they're unwilling to play ball, usually that's a good sign that you want to look for a new agency, or you want to start looking at taking things in-house. I've got a blog article on my site that I will drop a link to in the description. I'm really passionate about helping good agencies do better. I'm really passionate about helping good companies, good teams escape bad agencies. And I just want to be honest with people. I want to tell the truth. I want to explain how to make these decisions so that you're not going on Reddit and asking, hey, I've paid $100,000 in the last quarter for my agency. Should I keep them? And then have a bunch of clowns who've never actually worked on an account, or an account of your size, and telling you, oh, you're overpaying, even though I have no idea what's being delivered or involved or anything. It's just like, don't trust randos on Reddit unless they give you, very specific information that is tailored to your explanation. Like, give a bunch of information, as much as you can, like without like giving away private information, but like explain the context. And then if people ignore that context and are just like, you're paying too much, just don't pay attention to those people. But if somebody gives you like a really clear response that is, takes into account all of your context and is like, yes, from my experience, which is this and this and this, I would say do this and this and this, then, you can take those people and kind of, again, take it with a grain of salt, because every situation's different. But you can kind of, consider their input. But generally, like, Reddit's not going to be the best place to go and get information if you're, at the level that you're paying $25K, $30K, $50K as for a retainer with your agency, because most of the people on Reddit are just freelancers or they're agency owners themselves, and everybody's got an angle. So take it all with a grain of salt, let it all in, but don't trust everybody that answers you on Reddit, please, or LinkedIn for that matter. Although LinkedIn, you can at least go and look at their profile and see if maybe they've done anything or posted anything ever that would indicate that they have the experience. So yeah, I hope this helps you. I hope some of that clears up the really confusing and convoluted question of, should I fire my agency? I'm going to drop a link to my blog post in the description. If this was helpful, I am going to have a lot more long form and short form and hopefully organized videos in the future about how to make these decisions as an in-house team, how to, as a marketing leader, get the most out of your PPC team, your PPC accounts, and how to tie strategy to action, and basically, how to hire good help if you're doing that. I just want to help you level up. So thanks, like, subscribe, do the things. I'll see you next time. Ever